Hello, I'm Amber Case. I grew up in a family of nerds. My parents were broadcast engineers. My dad did some audio engineering and he put television on the air, but he also was an audio engineer and he made microphones and speakers and synthesizers. And he taught me a lot when I was a kid about signal processing,
Hmm.
which just think about this. You walk into a big room, all the walls are very cubical, and there's all these echoing sounds, and it doesn't feel good. You don't exactly know why. And everyone in the room has to speak louder and louder to be heard over each other. And you start to get really tired and you leave the event, you don't feel very good. Um, and then you go to your grandma's house, and it's filled with couches and throw rugs and all these books, and it's just very lived in. And you say, "Oh, I feel so nice in this room," and you don't have to speak very loud to be heard, and you just feel good and you feel relaxed and restored. And the difference there is because the walls of the cube are reflecting lots and lots of sound. We expect our tech to be super, super easy to use at first blush, but a really good tool like a pen or a pencil might take 10 or 12 years to learn how to use because you're learning the language to communicate with people. And then you're just focusing on the writing and not the pencil. And so I think some of these objects become so ubiquitous in our lives that we don't notice them. We don't notice all of the well-designed stuff in our environment because there's no trade show on like the future of the pencil.
Mm.
It's just a pencil. A lot of these products are more like elephants. And it's a hard line because you can also over-engineer a thing. And there's a lot of jokes about this in the airplane industry where there was an airplane that got over-engineered for 3 years and then couldn't lift off the ground because they didn't test it often enough. But
Mm.
with the right understanding and the right direction, I'm just looking on Dyson, it took 50 months and 103 engineers to make the Dyson supersonic hairdryer. Can you imagine that
Wow.
investment?
Yeah, thank you for joining me. I mean, I did my best to read your books and formulate my questions and thoughts and stuff like that, and a lot of it resonated. I worked in an automotive OEM for close to 2 decades, so we did some sort of work like that, and a lot of it was just ad hoc design, without incorporating some of the principles that you're talking about. So a lot of it resonated, and if you don't mind me, I won't necessarily. Would you be okay if you to indulge my curiosity in your book? And so the questions I had, these are sort
Yeah.
of not okay. Good, good, good.
Yeah. You can ask me anything you like. I did like competitive speech and debate, and so I'm prepared
Thank
to answer
God.
any question.
Thank
Yeah, yeah.
God. Okay. Um, yeah. So I won't do the usual rigmarole of like introductions and stuff. And just dive right into it. What in your opinion? I mean, so the way I gather calm technology, the whole principle is that it should sort of like dissolve the boundary between you and the technology, and you just kind of use this technology in sort of a seamless way. So the technology kind of disappears, and you're kind of in a flow state interacting with this piece of tech.
That's right. And that's the misnomer about calm tech usually is that the first part of that quote, the best technologies are invisible, is that people stop at invisible. And the rest of the quote is that you should focus on the task, not the tool. And what you said is correct. It's the seamless, but seamless doesn't mean invisible. It means invisible when you use it, that your tool becomes an extension of yourself. You don't focus on the glasses, you focus on the view through the glasses. You don't focus on the window, you focus on the view outside. You don't
Mm.
focus on your shoes when you wear them if they're designed to fit your foot and support your motion. You focus on walking. You focus on your, well, it could be said that an iPhone is the ultimate calm tech in that you dissolve, go right through the screen and forget that you're in there and kind of go into this hole of information. But it's that kind of design, like a light switch, like an eyeglass, like a shoe, that enables us to have technology and objects and tools in our life for a long time, like a hammer, a knife, all of these things. We're tool using creatures, and that is the hard part when a lot of people build technology systems. A lot of people that are building them right now have no experience in food service. They have never worked in a factory. They haven't fixed a bike, and they are not experienced in contracting or maintaining systems that produce entropy. Some people might be pretty good at making food, but a lot of people are in their head thinking about making these perfect systems. But a lot of people are focusing on the tech. They're focusing on AR and VR and AI, whatever is the new hottest thing, even though AI came out in 1956 and VR and AR are all really old stuff from the 60s. But it's that the difference between focusing on what people really need and having these objects that people can use that are trusty and alongside versus having objects that are just objects for themselves. And I think we see this when someone talks about a camera. If you have a lot of experience as a photographer, your camera is your tool. You can use lots of different cameras. You understand the flavor of the camera and what it allows you to do. But the number one thing I see people saying on social media when somebody posts a nice picture is they say, "What camera did you use?" As if there's nothing going on in the mind that has evolved alongside that tool to be able to wield that tool to take that photo, that it's solely done by the technology itself. And I think that misnomer gets a lot of people in trouble today. And I think it's an astute observation that seamless and being part of the thing that you're doing is more of the idea of calm tech than having something that takes very little time to learn how to use but doesn't stay the same shape. I guess one last example is we expect our tech to be super, super easy to use at first blush, but a really good tool like a pen or a pencil might take 10 or 12 years to learn how to use because you're learning the language to communicate with people. And then you're just focusing on the writing and not the pencil. And so I think some of these objects become so ubiquitous in our lives that we don't notice them. We don't notice all of the well-designed stuff in our environment because there's no trade show on like the future of the pencil.
Mm.
It's just a pencil. And you have stores where you can get upgrades and downgrades of a pencil, and you have this whole range of choices and options. And you have the favorite one that you use that you develop a relationship with, possibly. But I think right now it's like the great disposable age in which we don't get to really get to have a relationship with our tools in the way that we used to when there were less of them available. And we're used to not having a relationship with something for more than a couple of years in our digital interfaces. And I think that's a real shame because I feel like human time is also object time. And if you're constantly swapping things around, you float on the surface instead of going deep. And the kind of craftspersonship about these systems goes by the wayside as well, because the memory of making something that works really well with someone and that dedication to design and layout and human scale starts to go away and get replaced with make sure we hit the quarterly report.
Mm. But you mentioned iPhone earlier. I mean, like I look at my parents using WhatsApp, the messaging app, and it's for whatever reason they've turned up the dials of notifications so high, so loud, and it is so invasive to your like sort of day-to-day the kind of calm lifestyle that I would like to live anyway. And this happens at scale. This is India. There's about 1 billion people, and 1.5 billion people, and I would wager there are about 1 billion cell phones in India. And you go to any public place, you're going to hear, the massive like ringtone, like chorus of things. And not only that, well, I'll get to the other example really quick. But I mean, the horse is out of the barn with this, right? Like technologies have already sort of evolved and matured and people have adapted to it. Is there any way to rein this back? Is it nudging behavior? Is it like just adopting principles sort of iteratively and seeing what works? How do we kind of pull back from this?
It's interesting because I think it goes in waves. Because when you had the little Motorola phones and little Nokia phones and the very first ringtones, they were really annoying and loud, and everybody was setting them off. And then it became a faux pas to turn those things on. And
Right.
I feel like right now, what will look retro and outdated and gauche will be somebody in the future just looking at photos of people just looking into their phones, or they'll find it very quaint because, God forbid we have brain computer interface with advertising 24/7 that help regulate our serotonin, and I hope that does. I mean, for medical purposes, that does make sense. But there's this difference between this kind of sci-fi future, which is either dystopian or entirely utopian, and the real world in which people just want to live in the real world. Like, computing was always supposed to be in the environment, not us being inside of the increasingly smaller glowing rectangle. It was supposed to be more present. And I think that's what Mark Weiser talked a lot about with his pads, tabs, and boards concept, that you might have a small e-ink display with an article on it. And if you want to share that, you just give the tablet to someone and they read it. And it's low cost and it's okay. And that you might have projected displays if you want to interact with things. Folk Computer is working on that right now. There's this idea of malleable computing. There's all these things at the edges that are happening that are good, but they're right at the edge. So I think it's just, these systems get built, they're really neat. They get super centralized and financialized
Right.
because they're so fast moving that venture capitalists who are managing high risk wealth of multi-generational wealthy companies have a financial incentive to make a 3 to 100x return on that for their portfolio investors. And they must do that ideally within 7 years, definitely within 10, because they have to raise another fund. And so it's an abstraction on an abstraction to say this company needs to make X amount. It's not about the people that use it. And it needs to either change hands or go public to return the investment. And these investors must invest in high risk, and software is just so much faster than hardware in a lot of cases that you might have a great piece of software, or you might even have a great piece of hardware, but it always enshittifies, right? I think
What's
that
that?
it enshittifies. I guess I don't want to swear on the podcast. The
Oh, you can
tendency for
absolutely
the
swear. What is that word? I've never heard of it. Enshittifies?
enshittification.
Okay.
Who
I've
came
never
up
heard
with
of that.
this?
Sorry.
Enshittification is a reprioritization pattern where online product and service providers experience the decline in quality over time. This is part of Cory Doctorow's kind of a perverse incentive model, which is
Hmm.
you might have a great company, like Evernote, for instance. Love that company. The person that created that wanted it to be around 100 years. But the people who invested in the company, the need to make profit, the need to return investor money meant that all of the really neat features for power users, the people that wanted to live in it for 100 years, ended up getting turned off and the company became shitty. And I think
Hmm.
that's happening across the board, is that you don't own the thing. People need to raise money somehow to make these projects, versus there's a very nice middle class system of families in Germany where they make really good physical objects year after year. They keep the information within their family and they're very reliable. Um, and it's hard to trust systems when the incentive is for the system to make money and continuously make money versus make an enough money to make an enough to make enough money to support the team that builds it and to keep it going long term. And I think that's just how it is. It's not like that's bad or good. That's what's happening right
Yeah.
now. And so there's a huge opportunity for people at the edges to do the opposite, to make stuff in new ways, ideally modularly, ideally WordPress shaped, where you can expand on it, kind of like being able to post your own page or website on the web, in a way that doesn't require venture capital. And
Yeah.
it's how can people think a little bit opposite of what's going on? Um, because that's where the next thing always is. It's not the really trendy, scary da 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 thing right in front of you that everybody is telling you is important. It's the what isn't being covered, what's not being talked about. And in my opinion, I think most programming is very similar to each other. You need to deal with time zones. You need to have a database. You need to query the database, delete rows from the database, combine it. Uh, there's different views on that. We're just talking about Notion app right here. You need to be able to add, subtract, edit. If you want to do multiplayer database, you need to have authentication and permissioning, and then you need to be able to have um, a situation in which two people can't destroy a record by by touching it at the same time, then maybe you need a version history, and maybe you need to visualize that. But in a way, it's almost entirely a database game, and then you need to do that quickly if you have a bunch of different people around the world using that. So you need Anycast, and you need all these different servers and delivery methods. But fundamentally, it's all kind of the same stuff.
Mm.
And it doesn't make sense that from scratch everything has to always be built and that there isn't like the ultimate time segment feature that everybody could use. I think we see this with like some sort like MySQL or something like that. Like there's maybe 1.5 people maintaining that or something. It's an interesting situation in which some of the things that people really rely on don't need to be run by that many people at all. Whereas you have a company that's raised a lot of money, hasn't validated what their customers need, and makes this huge system that's a big mess. And we have to focus on quantity right now, not quality, because we're in a really short time crunch for some reason. and
Yeah.
and so I don't believe that I really think that there's kind of a conservation of time no matter what you do. If you put a shortcut on the front, you pay for it in the end. And if you take a long time in the front, you end up having this amazing amount of time at the end. It draws out that process. And I'd like to give some clear examples of cool
Yeah.
calm tech products, right? So Dyson, the vacuum and hair dryer manufacturer. They said, you know what hasn't been innovated in a while? It's not, let's add AR and VR to our hair dryer, to see how your hair could be and take you through the directions and what you could do. They said, the thing that hasn't been innovated since the 40s is the hair dryer. I wonder what a hair dryer of the future would look like. And I interviewed people and realized that, somebody wakes up at 6 a.m. or they're going to probably annoy someone in their household with a really loud sound. And so they said, where we can innovate on the hairdryer is on sound. How does that change the shape of the hairdryer? How does that change the price? How can we make the quietest hairdryer? What makes the sound loud? It's the moving parts. Can we reduce the amount of moving parts? Can we make the parts fit together better? How do we do that? How long does it take to do that? Okay, I think it takes 4.5 years. It turns out lots and lots of investment. And then you end up having something you can license to almost every product that has a moving object in it. And yeah, it's expensive to start, but then you get cheaper and cheaper because the components get better. People use this for a long time and it becomes a market leader and it's iconic. And that's a big difference between applying more of a long-term research-led calm tech approach, um, which is look at the sense that's being disruptive, that's taking most of your attention, and EQ it, knock it down a notch, remove some of that.
What's
If
EQ? It mean?
Oh yeah, so should give you a little history. I don't know how you're going to edit this, but I'll just say, hello, I'm Amber Case. I grew up in a family of nerds. My parents were broadcast engineers. My dad did some audio engineering and he put television on the air, but he also was an audio engineer and he made microphones and speakers and synthesizers. And he taught me a lot when I was a kid about signal processing,
Hmm.
which just think about this. You walk into a big room, all the walls are very cubical, and there's all these echoing sounds, and it doesn't feel good. You don't exactly know why. And everyone in the room has to speak louder and louder to be heard over each other. And you start to get really tired, and you leave the event, you don't feel very good. And then you go to your grandma's house, and it's filled with couches and throw rugs and all these books, and it's just very lived in. And you say, oh, I feel so nice in this room. And you don't have to speak very loud to be heard, and you just feel good and you feel relaxed and restored. And the difference there is because the walls of the cube are reflecting lots and lots of sound. And the really nice, cozy room is absorbing a lot of the sound. And so in one case, you're actually getting your ears are working a lot. You have to try really hard to process the signal of somebody else's voice going into your head. And signal processing is just looking at the effects of that on the human mind and looking at different frequency ranges. Like a baby cries in this very specific frequency range to make you care and hear it no matter what. And so an EQ to notch something out, to EQ filter, you could take some of that spectrum and like get rid of that sharp baby's voice in your headphones while you're on the plane so that the baby doesn't bother you anymore. Or you're in a car and the bass is up and it's rattling the car. You can take out the frequency that rattles at the same frequency as your car. It's called a cavity resonance, where something, it's the resonant frequency of the thing that's played inside the car. So, so a lot of calm technology is actually signal processing. It's about looking in your environment and saying, oh, here's a new here's a new toilet. It's very smart. I don't know what it would do. It would do something smart, like give you an analysis of how much water you've used or whatever. But when you open the seat at night, because it's new and fancy and smart, it has this giant blue light that illuminates the whole room. And your night vision gets messed up and your circadian rhythm gets a little bit messed up. The melatonin that's in your system that's helping you sleep, you basically get woken up. And why do people choose blue? Because blue looks cool and blue is the color of technology. But if we were to say, hey, let's signal process that, let's look at what color of light would be better for not interrupting you at night, but still signals that the toilet is on and that it's futuristic and cool. And that might be a very warm orange, and it might be a low light so that you can still see the toilet when you walk in the bathroom without having to have a night light, but it's not going to prevent you from sleeping. And so that's just a shift. So a lot of these things shift the frequency of the sound, of the light, of the smell by using different materials, understand the space, understand human attention. And when it's absolutely necessary, if you have a fire alarm, then yeah, it should shout at you when it's bad. But one of the people that worked with me on the Calm Tech book, Carl Alviani, talked about, I think it was the kitty smoke detector, that the smoke detectors were going off and people just took the batteries out of them because they were embarrassed that they were going to go off because they might be a bad cook and it would be late at night. And so what Kitty did was research that it was not the technology that was the issue. It was the human interaction with the technology and the embarrassment. And so they made a push button to turn off the alarm that's big enough that you can hit it with the handle of a broomstick. So you don't have to go up to your ceiling. You just have a broomstick, turn it off. And that where it would be very important to have higher sensitivity would be in the bedroom, because if there's smoke in the bedroom, that's more important than if there's smoke in the kitchen. And so by understanding the human system and working with it more at human scale, I think it took 70 or 80% of the market. Super successful product. And it's kind of the same with a lot of technologies. It only takes like 3 months to figure out what was there in the past. For instance, AR and VR, you could really get into the weeds, understand whether that's absolutely necessary or whether like a projected display that's used in a museum is more effective and useful to people. Or you get a lot of futuristic videos from science fiction that make it into product demos somehow because they look cool. And I think the problem is tech that looks cool isn't necessarily fun to use. And when we go and watch a science fiction film, we want to be entertained. We want to be highly stimulated. We want to see the blue light. But when we go home, we don't want our fridge to talk to us and we don't want to be in a movie because that's high stimulus. We actually just want to chill and have our life be at the forefront. And so it's really worth asking like questions like, why is blue light so exciting? And
Yeah.
the
Or
answer
even
that,
like the sci-fi example where when text is being rendered, you just hear this kind of blip, 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 that it's like you don't need that. It's just really annoying.
That's totally right. Yeah, yeah. And I looked at the history of color for a while. There's a great book called what is it called? It's just called I think it's just called Color, like travels through a paint box, and it goes through the entire history of pigment. And at some point in history, blue was the most expensive color of paint to produce.
Hmm.
And so the Virgin Mary in any painting that someone was commissioned to do, they would wait to paint the Virgin Mary first in the most expensive color at the time because she was the most important part of painting. And
Yeah.
second, they'd wait because they need to have that blue on special order, and they needed to make sure that the patron paid them
Yeah.
before they could actually do it. And but that blue is interesting too because when I was a kid and the I was starting to solder when I was 4 because my dad loved soldering and wanted me to be his assistant.
Hmm.
Um, we would go to Radio Shack in like 1990, 1991, and it would be and Radio Shack was the place where you bought electronics like
Right.
LEDs, and LEDs were very exciting. And I remember the blue LEDs were $40 USD, and the other LEDs, the green, the yellow, and the red, were like 2 to 3 cents. This
Wow.
huge difference. And so, why was that? Because blue is so high energy that it was very expensive to produce something that could put that much high energy in and still retain the same size. It's just like when you have a little tiny microwave speaker and it can only go like that high pitched beep, because actually, to make a low resonant tone, you need a bigger speaker usually, or it's very expensive. Like
Hmm.
a whale can produce a very nice low frequency, so can a giant semi truck, but it's really hard to find a very small speaker that can produce a really beautiful low frequency bass. It's kind of the same with LEDs. It's very expensive to produce this high energy. And so my dream when I was a kid is, whoa, one day I'm going to be able to use those blue LEDs. One day they'll get cheaper. And I think it was the Nobel Prize for Physics in either 2004 or 2005 that was given to someone who created a cheaper blue
Yeah.
LED, basically, allowing us to have these liquid crystal displays and all of these things that we use now, because
Hmm.
suddenly you could have these little pairings of these three LEDs. And then it was that scarce color, that blue, my hypothesis at least, that was just like the Virgin Mary color. It was the expensive color. So well, let's use it in film because it's expensive and it looks cool. And then it became a trope. Versus if you talk with anybody in the military or who's worked on submarines, they want orange light at night for your 24-hour shift. And yet we're driving around in cars, not with orange panels. Some cars still retain them, but mostly with these giant blue rectangles that get in the way, leave little tracers on our eyes, and maybe to keep us a little bit more awake, but they don't allow us to pass through and actually drive our cars. And it takes so much more energy to drive with all these things. And, some of the other things that are calm tech are, you know, a a little light that turns on your rear view window if someone's in your blind spot.
Yeah.
That's orange. That's usually it's orange. It's well designed. That's very calm tech. The rear view mirror, very calm tech. But some of the other stuff in the car at the same time is not. And so it's an interesting situation. But yeah, I think that it's that difference between the desire to be really excited by something that you see, and then people get conflate that with assuming that everybody wants to be a system administrator to live in their own home and be constantly messed with by all these
Alerted. Yeah.
technologies. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the points you made earlier, you said, and it's probably irrelevant to this conversation, but I was kind of piqued my interest. But you said something like Dyson, which takes maybe some Dyson product, which takes maybe a few years to design, but the success of the product will sort of play out in the long term. Whereas something that you're trying to quick iterate and get it out of the market to start making money or whatever, usually maybe not as successful or maybe just be riddled with all these other problems. I was wondering, is that an empirical observation or is that your personal view or is it just generally? Because I like that philosophy of trying to play the long game and trying to really work at refining something, but it also comes at a huge cost, right? Because in the meantime, you're not earning any kind of return from your investment. You're just kind of spreading this out.
That's a great question. It's been my observation a lot of time that people are trying to cut corners. I have some stories about this I'm not going to reveal the names
Yeah.
because I respect the people involved and I know that nobody tried to do this incorrectly. But there was a very good, more government-focused innovation design group. And you could be part of this program and not have to make any money in it for 3 years,
Mm.
possibly even 4. Because, for instance, when you put a seed in the ground to plant a tree, you don't yell at it after a quarter and say, "Why haven't you given me any results?"
Right.
Obviously, because it's an oak tree. You want to make a house out of it. You expect even in 3 years you're starting to see some growth, and a lot of that's under the ground. And so a lot of people are prematurely chopping these trees and trying to build houses out of them, out of
Mm.
basically twigs, without allowing them to grow. They're not putting them in environments that make sense. In my opinion, it takes a while. And it takes getting out of your kind of local minimum of understanding of what's possible to make the next big thing, or just interview people in a system and do something incremental. It could take much less time, but you still do need at least like 3 months of research to find out what the issue is. The Swiffer floor cleaner was developed by asking people things. It wasn't developed by, of course they were looking for more ways to make money, but I think there's this notion that in this department that I'll refer back to, that the person that led that team, which had amazing results, 3 years, you don't have to make profit, but then you're making really, really good things in the future, was hired by a private company, well, a publicly traded company, um, non-government, and for a while they ran it and they were allowed to give everybody these 3 years. And they made some pretty cool stuff. And then they said, we only have 2 years now. Let's just do it in 2 years. Can you do it in 2 years? And obviously, um, it didn't work. You it's almost like telling someone, it's like this old adage, it's like, okay, so do you want to have a premature baby? Like, do you need to
Yeah.
spend the 9 months to incubate it? Or a lot of these products are more like elephants. And it's a hard line because you can also over engineer a thing, and there's a lot of jokes about this in the airplane industry, where there was an airplane that got over engineered for 3 years and then couldn't lift off the ground because they didn't test it often enough. But
Mm.
with the right understanding and the right direction, I'm just looking on Dyson, it took 50 months and 103 engineers to make the Dyson Supersonic hair dryer. Can you imagine that
Wow.
investment? I mean,
Mm.
to say we have a clear direction, let's make this graph, let's understand what part we're changing, and here's our plan.
A
You
very
have to
analytical approach towards.
It is, yeah, with people, right? They did
Mhm.
qualitative of understanding the feeling of what it was like to be next to a really loud, annoying hair dryer, and
Mhm.
then the approach on the engineering side of what would it take to reduce the decibels on this? Because we know it's decibel reduction that will change how people approach this product and will change the industry. So it's both, right? And not that many people have the foresight and the guts and the longevity of a company to do that. That's the point of making a long-term company that has a resiliency so that you
Mhm.
can make a bet like that, and make something really interesting. And I think it's and this isn't a thing that is new. I don't think. I think throughout history it's always been like this. People are trying to do shortcuts. I think it's a matter of the human mind too. Again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I do think that the human mind does need to save memory and will try to autocomplete as much as possible in its own way. It's the same with a company. It's how how few people can we run this on? How do we get this profit? It's when it's in an optimization loop that's around money, then it gets into that shape. Whereas if it's an optimization loop around being resilient and having enough slack and not burning people out, you end up having a very long-term beloved company. Or just look at some of the Japanese companies that are family run that have been around for 400 or 500 years that like
Wow, really?
fundamentally understand. Oh yeah, I love I love just looking at companies that have been around for like at least a couple centuries,
Mhm.
because if somebody's going to your house in Japan and fixing your roof tile and it's been in their family for 400 years, they know almost every single permutation the weather can throw at that weather tile, or that
Wow.
that that house tile, right? Because they have it in their history. And that was a lot more about craftsperson models
Hmm.
You know how to make a really good ceramic bowl, so you don't ever have to replace it. And I think that's really important to be able to consider. Um,
What do you think? I mean, I've also kind of looked into that Japanese way of respecting decades and decades of experience, like that whole idea of takumis I was researching a little while ago. At Lexus, I think this is one example. They employ you as a designer in certain phases of product development only when you've spent like 3 decades of like sort of apprenticeship and things like that within the company, and it shows in their products, right? Like well designed, robust products. And it's also a cultural thing, right? Like where people want to just, hey, wing it, just get it out the door sort of deal, versus like obsess over every fine detail. I know we're digressing here, but I think this gets at the root of that too, right? I feel like it's also a cultural thing at some level.
I agree. It's interesting, the Takumi, the like 60,000 hour
Right.
story of human craft, right? It's I think that there's that theory of 10,000 hours of focus practice for a person to become an expert. Um, but yeah, in Japan, that's 8 hours a day, 240 days a year for over 30 years. That seems like a reasonable amount of time to me to become good at something.
Hmm.
Because think about in other industries, that's totally acceptable for poetry, absolutely acceptable for writing,
Hmm.
um, being a good judge in the court system, being a professor. A really good professor sometimes are 60 or 70 years old. Somebody who
I
starts
knew
really
none of
young.
this. Thank you for enlightening me.
like think about it. Like,
Yeah, I
do
mean, makes
you
sense.
like, are you going to trust a 36-year-old professor who
Yeah.
hasn't written their life's work yet? Or is it totally reasonable that somebody's taken 30 years to do their life's work by writing a bunch of different little things? Like, for instance, like Robert Caro, who wrote some of the most incredible biographies in history, well, history of the United States, is, I think he's in his 80s.
Hmm.
Um, and he takes for his 5 book series on Lyndon Johnson, has spent almost as much time as Lyndon Johnson has been alive to write the biography on him
Yeah.
historically. And so it's interesting because you get these singular objects out of people who've spent that much time.
Hmm.
And like for me, I feel like I have a leg up on this industry simply because since the age of 3, I was growing up in a house very similar to how I heard Mark Weiser of Calm Technology lived, which is filled with electronics experiments. And that was my dad making voice activated lights, smart sprinkler systems, in 1989,
Wow,
1991,
really?
with off the shelf products, or I'd hack them together. They had LEDs, they had notification styles. And
Hmm.
because I was surrounded by, and at the age of 8, had a voice activated light in my room, an intercom system drilling
Wow.
through the walls of the house to make a prototypical Wi-Fi, which didn't exist yet, really.
Wow,
Um,
really?
it was not like distributed equally, but yeah, my dad was like, let's have Wi-Fi. Like, what do we need to make our own Wi-Fi system? Okay, we each have a node in the house now. Here you go. We made a Wi-Fi and mesh network, and I just took the drill to drill through the house so we could run the Cat5 cable to like make a system, right? And I did little system administration things by running LAN parties when I was like 15, 16, and we all got like the Cisco certified class for routers. Like the thing about it was that we didn't think that we were learning anything. I didn't think that, like the piano that I grew up with, my mom's piano. We were in Denver, Colorado, which is very dry. That piano, in order not to get detuned, needed to be watered. It had a humidifier in it,
Hmm.
and that when you needed to water it, this beautiful like amber colored light would turn on. It was very decorative that matched the aesthetics of the piano. And then it was my job to water it. So I was waiting for the light. And then my dad liked that. So he made this light that turned on. And the X10 controller switch was behind a big shelving system. So I couldn't move it. And the light would turn on at 8 p.m. And when the light turned on, I had to go to bed. And it was this gorgeous orange colored light that would turn on. I had to stop talking and go to bed. And now there are a bunch of technologies out there. There's a great app. It's a great physical device for kids called OK to Wake, because kids can't read time yet if they're really young, but they
Hmm.
want to know when it's safe to get out of bed so they don't annoy their parents. And so when they wake up and the light is red, they don't get up. And if it gets yellow, you can prepare and get ready to wake up. You still can't tell time because you're still a kid. So the light tells you, the light conveys that information. And when it's green, you can go and bug your parents. And so it's a signaling system. It's a true calm technology that gives you an ambient understanding of what time it is without you having to parse it. And I think that's so important, to think about all the ways that we can signify things with just light and just sound, the minimum amount of tension, the minimum amount of resolution.
Do you
And
think,
that's
so, sorry to interrupt you, do you think this scales to the greater part of humanity, all the 8 billion people that we have across cultures, across sensibilities?
There's a great book called Low Tech, Radical Indigenism, which I suggest everybody reads. There's also this term called cosmotechnics, which is that every single culture has their own technics, and their own like technology, basically.
Mm.
Um, and that we shouldn't assume, and what we are assuming right now is that the stuff that's made in Silicon Valley in the West specifically is technology, and everything else is not. Everything
I
else is
know, I'm
just
100% with with that idea. Whenever people
yeah.
say, I used to work at a big OEM company that did a lot of engineering work, and they would always use this phrase like, "Oh, we're not a technology company now. We're a tech." Wait a minute. What do you mean? Like we're creating these products, we're creating machines that can using technology, but technology got sort of associated with computer stuff and
Yeah.
only like pure software
Yep.
oriented stuff. I don't know when that happened, but anyway, I
Yeah.
don't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah. Like a glass is a piece of technology.
Exactly.
A Tupperware is a piece of technology. So is a fork. So is a pair of chopsticks. So is a pair of chopsticks made out of metal. It's this permutation. So to me, there isn't necessarily an idea that anything could scale. It's more of an inherent human understanding of how we understand attention and how that permeates out through whatever culture, is that
Mhm.
many cultures know it inherently. Many cultures have always understood in their own way, adjusted to their own natural environment. Um, and some cultures like Japan, the tea ceremony families. I got to meet a descendant of one of the tea ceremony families, when I was in Kyoto. Um, it was a calming technology to say, hey, at this point in our history, we're getting messed with by nature. There's hurricanes and earthquakes. We should probably stop fighting amongst ourselves. So we're going to have peace talks in these little tea houses where you walk through this like little thing in the woods where it's actually pretty small space, but because the path winds and it's watered down, it gets you reflective surfaces. You actually feel like it's in a larger space than it is. And when you duck down to get into the tea room, you disarm yourself if you're wearing a sword because there's not enough room for you and the sword on your back to get in, and you have to bow and be at the same level. I mean, all of the little detail that goes into it, um, is really interesting. And so everybody's got something,
Mm.
but I feel like, and I'm just going to call out American style technology, somehow along the way, um, the the kind of American style technology needs to be so overt and like in your face. You see this in Japan too, in Tokyo, everything's in your face. It's intense.
Yeah.
um, but I think it's this really important situation in which um, I think it's this really important situation in which nature gives you just as much information as the information in a city, but one of them totally overwhelms us and makes us tired, and the other one interests us and brings us back to life and resets our senses. And it's completely based on how that information is presented, how that information is designed. There's a lot of really intense stuff in nature, right? Like really bright colors, or really subdued colors where you are. But all of it is giving you information if you look closely. And if you look really close, like a 3-year-old might watch a ladybug go through the grass, you can learn a lot more. But if you look really close in a city, you might see that the entropy of that system might get kind of depressed. Or you might see an area in which people care for things really well. And it really, really depends. Like, if you go to like Bushwick, New York, and I led people on a quiet meditation walk, which is just don't talk during the walk and just walk around, we all basically turned into kids again because we noticed like the character of the neighborhood was actually very human. There were like little tiny plaques up and like little tiny cute things that people have made that in a very industrial or like a very gentrified area, you're going to get like a condo and a professionally designed dog wash station that doesn't have that human touch to it. Um, and so, when you ask about scaling this, it's like anybody can do this. Anybody should be able to um, make a notification system that gives them that information or change it. And that's really the point of the Calm Tech Institute is, hey, maybe in a lot of these cases, we've forgotten how to have technology that works alongside us. And here, is my 35-page standard for home automation devices that brings back all the considerations that if you follow this checklist, you will be able to produce something that, doesn't annoy 5-year-old me because I've grown up next to the stuff that works well and the stuff that doesn't. And I can tell you, I'm kind of like a canary in the coal mine of, I know that thing doesn't work because I live next to it and I know where it breaks down. I know where the entropy happens, and I know how to maintain it because I had to maintain it as a kid. I wasn't,
Hmm.
I was kind of my dad's assistant. Like this thing breaks, go fix it. Here's the toolbox. Some things can't fix. Okay, well now they're hand-me-downs and they're in my room. Like, what am I going to do with this? They're like, well, that is a blue light. Put a piece of paper over it. Put duct tape over it so it doesn't keep you up at night. It's very different to build technology and then to live alongside it, and to live alongside it as a kid where there wasn't much in my room except like random random stuff because my dad was kind of a mix, I would say, of like Mark Weiser and Steve Wozniak, one of the people that made Apple
Hmm.
Computer, because Wozniak didn't have enough money to afford a personal computer, so at night he just came up with the how would he do it cheap enough to fit everything on a board. And my dad would stay up and we'd think, I want these $20,000 speakers. What can I do? What math can I learn to build these in a way that doesn't cost that much? It's kind of like when we look at the filtration systems for forest fires, and it's like, here's your box fan, and here's your 4 filters, and this costs like $80, and it works just as well as a $300 filter. Now you can give these out to people and protect their health. And so that's the innovations that I think are scalable, is that it's that, hey, we have a limitation. Let's look at the thing we need and let's build it. And that ingenuity. I think a lot of people have too many resources, and so they aren't forced into that shape. Um, but there's also something to be said for multi-generational apprenticeship. Like just looking at any of these beautiful furniture companies that I think it's like Vietsko. Just look this up. So Vietsko does this modular furniture since 1959, and they have this, the 606 universal shelving system that is just like a Lego block. It works the same throughout history, and you can always have one forever, and it doesn't change. And when you're applying for this company, I think that in the application process, you might work alongside them for a day, and they're looking at how you care for the tools and where you put them afterwards, and how
Hmm.
detail oriented you are. It's not just about being tedious. If you're really good at your thing as a craftsperson, you are going to get better at the process and use less energy to produce something beautiful and deeply care for your tools as if they're part of your own. You wouldn't take your hand, if your hand is your tool, and slam it down on a bench at the end of the day and not wash it. But it's the equivalent if you're dealing with a tool to doing that, if that's the thing that you use. So that care and detail and being part of the thing, I think, is really, really important. And now there's this notion that people don't have the time for that, which is an interesting one because um, because people need to, immediately make money. I don't know. I've had a strange time in which I thought I have a lot of time, out of college. And yes, I needed to make money because I went to college on a scholarship and I came out into the recession. But I managed to get myself a user experience job, and it was a 40-hour-a-week job, which is rare in the States, and declared my intellectual property that I had made because I did a little startup in college. And I spent the other 60 hours a week making a startup. And I didn't leave my day job until we had customers and traction. I didn't ask for a lot of money. We raised the least amount of money we could. We put all of our processes up on screens at our house with like used monitors, and we could watch how long it took to run these processes. And then when one took too long, we'd rewrite that. And by the time we quit our jobs, we had investment, we had a little team. So it wasn't about the glory and the thrill of a startup. It was, this is an interesting project, and things converged and it did well. But it's the exact opposite. It's kind of like when somebody says, I want to write a book. It's like, no, you want to have written a book. You don't want to do the process because it's difficult. But I like process. And I think there's a lot of people out there that the process is meditative. Like, I loved
Mhm.
working food service. I loved working making burritos because I could basically meditate and get paid for it all day long. I knew where all the objects were. I could produce a very good burrito. I liked the burritos, so I ended up working there because I wanted a burrito every day, and then I wanted to go to the bookstore next door after my shift and read books. Ideal
Mhm.
life, you know. Um, High school, was still living with my parents. I was like, I have free rent. I need a job in the summer. This will be great. I can have some stuff to do. Then I can meet my friends after I'm reading books, and we could talk about the books. You know, it was like, and there's time weirdly, but it's not where you think it is. And the meditation of being in that food service environment, even if that was like a 4-hour dishwashing shift, which is very magical to me.
Mhm.
Um, because I was producing something that people consumed, and I could see feedback wise whether they were happy or not. And when I worked in software, I couldn't see it. You might get a report. And so I'd always have people over to my house like, hey, can you try out the software? We have free pizza. You know, and maybe I'd give them some beer, and at the end of the night, they'd be like, this sucks. And I'd invite the people back that told me that it sucked because I wanted to know the truth before I scaled it up to, you know, every time we did a launch, that one, it was like 10 times the amount of people. And you don't want those initial problems to be there. Um, but I think it's a very different way of looking at things that if you understand the kind of, not the trend graph, but like the sine wave or signal processing, but like the wave shape of how things go, you can miss a wave because technology always repeats itself or rhymes or whatever. And you can still be like 7 years late, and that's still 3 years early for the next one. So as
Mhm.
long as you position yourself and do your research, which involves just looking at some research papers and seeing what people got wrong, they've already spent their millions and millions of dollars or whatever currency on
Mhm.
their research, and all you need to do is read what they left behind. It's not hard to read. It might have different names, but that's about it. And having that, you know, I did a lot of that when I was in college because I had time, and I, you know, made it my business to take the time to read these papers. You can design things that don't cost you all of that R&D, and you end up fulfilling people's dreams from 10 years back. And you can talk to them and say, hey, remember that thing that you worked on with this research paper? Like, it wasn't time for it back then, but the time is now, and you can say, like, here it is, you
Mhm.
know. And sometimes people are really, really thrilled, and it's neat, you know. But it's it's a hard thing because I think the tyranny of the moment is so strong that it's really, really hard to see through to what's actually important or real. And that's a real shame because people are missing and fluttering about so hard to do anything. And, and you know, I'm not immune to that for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I get distracted too, but um, it's important for me to notice that. And the way that I'm trying to architect my life is so that I have more time to seriously consider things, um, versus just panicking constantly, about, you know, having to make something immediately profitable, and to be able to step back and try to make a standard, or at least a set of checklists or guidelines or philosophy. Somebody's got to do it, and they have to be sincere about it. And for me, it's just about taking care of Mark Weiser's vision, because he died at 46 and he isn't around to see his vision come to life,
Mhm.
and to really honor it in a way by taking that past environment that's very hard to load into the future, and to say, hey, this is an interesting perspective. Let's consider other perspectives, even if they're only like 20 or 30 years old. That's pretty recent to me, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Also, I mean, I think I'm going to go back to the culture part of it. We also feel like we live in a culture where we glorify things that are done quickly, right? So you look at Tech Newsweek magazine or something like that. There's always these pictures of people who achieved unicorn status in 2 years. They put this product out and then they're valued at X million dollars and things like that. And it's that is sort of glorified and sets the tone for society to say, you better get it done quickly. But then I look at some of the outcomes at the end of the day, like take India back, like some startups got valued like huge, enormous, $500 million evaluation startups and things like that, and everybody was glorified, and then now they're in bankruptcy. All of a sudden, something they didn't think through certain processes or the product and things like that. And anyway, it's also, I feel like some kind of societal enlightenment is also necessary at some level to sort of appreciate this kind of slowness to things, this kind of appreciating this meditative approach towards design or slowing down in general is a virtue. Going back to your earlier point about scaling up, I wanted to ask you this a little bit later, but it sort of, I thought I'll bring it up now nevertheless. What do you think about like AI being at the very periphery of different products? Let's just take an app, for example. And we have all these design principles to go and design what notifications we want, what kind of interactions we want our end users to how they want to interact with it, and so on. Could AI be that kind of living on the edge, where it looks at you, your culture, your history of history of habits and things like that, into your sensibilities, your preferences, and just sort of hyper customize it to that end user? So then you don't have to go with this sort of middle of the road approach that we're going to put it out with this set of COM principle technologies. It could sort of be adapted to at the very end.
I think that's another misnomer about AI.
Okay. How so?
The idea that people want that customization to all of their preferences.
I meant like more like applying the COM design. I haven't thought through this, but applying some sort of COM technology principles at the very end. Like, so let's say, hey, I want this to be loud in my face because I'm used to it.
And give someone
I don't want this COM technology, but a volume button. Yes, of course.
Yeah, they
what
can
if
turn it down.
there was a multitude of things that you have to interact with this thing, with this piece of, I guess, I don't know, app or something like that?
Give people a volume button, give people the ability to turn up the brightness on their notifications, give people the ability to hard on and off, turn off the notification style.
Okay.
It's just
So we don't
button.
need any kind of intelligence at the very corner. We can accomplish it with very. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know what intelligence is. No one's really defined this. The term
Okay.
artificial intelligence was come up to get Norbert Wiener to not show up at a conference in 1956 because he was a loudmouth and wouldn't stop talking and calling everything cybernetics. And so a bunch of researchers got together, asked Dartmouth if they could do a little summer conference, called it a name that they knew Norbert Wiener wouldn't like. He didn't show up, and they all got to hang out at the conference. That's where the term artificial intelligence comes from. It's it's a bit of a Trojan horse, right? It's the problem is that term got so much excitement from journalists that we're extending the fear from the Industrial Revolution that humans would be automated, because they did get automated. The human use of human beings through machines then does get extended through AI. You don't need AI to figure out your preferences. You're the one that needs to have buttons to change the preferences. Obviously the best company that's doing AI at the edge is Apple, because as part of their approach, they're bringing that summarization tool and all of that information into the app in a really solid way, into the apps where it's interesting. But where people aren't doing it well, it's like I'm opening up Adobe Acrobat and there's, sorry, I'm opening up Adobe Acrobat and there's like this purple giant like laser scorpion amount of attention that's drawing me to use their AI as if it's a shiny thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I don't need to use that, so don't advertise it to me.
Yeah. I guess I should have clarified what I'm trying to say. It's not so much some kind of in your face thing. it is this sort of something that's blended in the background and sort of over time learns your preferences in a variety of different circumstances and just sort of applies it, like what kind of a notification style I want on this set of, I don't know, applications or whatever you want to call it, user interfaces. I don't want with this. I want some very customized things. Well, I want this. Absolutely, if my robot vacuum cleaner is stuck, I want a pop-up on my screen. But if somebody messaged me, I don't want it. I know I could just customize it at the very end, but there's different dimensions to this, right? Like there's an audio dimension, there's a visual dimension, there's maybe a spatial dimension to this. Maybe not spatial dimensions, but there's audio and visual at the very least. And if I had to go and customize everything, would it just be, I don't know, maybe I'm giving a bad example. I haven't thought this through completely.
The question is why do you have that example to begin with?
Because I feel like if we're designing as a product designer, if you're going to design something with certain principles, there's always a group of people you're going to leave behind, right? Or no? Is that a bad assumption?
What is it based on your experience? What pain are people having?
So for example, I'll take maybe another example. A railway station. In the West, it's kind of quiet and calm. There's visual indications in a railway station where the trains are going. The train is leaving, and there's certain kinds of indications and so on. If I take this to India, it is loud. I mean, the notifications are very loud, and it's in your face. There's loud, audio and visual indications. Maybe the AI is a bad example here, but I guess maybe this is a fundamental question I want to ask you: is that the people also have gotten sort of conditioned to expect that in a railway station in India to be loud. But then when I go in to the railway station, even as a kid, when I grew up in India, this is very loud to me. And then when I go back to India now, as I've lived in America, this is still very loud. And I guess, how would you solve that kind of a problem? One is a nudging of behavior. It must be jarring to everybody because, like you said earlier, people know what a good notification is. We always have this sort of intuitive sense of what something is good enough, and we don't need it in our faces, but we also need it to be effective to tell us which train is moving out of which platform, what train is arriving at the station, and so on, without being too very intrusive into my life.
Yeah. Well, you can have a giant board that tells you the information, and you can wear noise canceling headphones when you're in the station, but none of that requires AI. If you had an app, it might.
But I guess I would take AI out of the. Maybe I didn't think through my example properly. I guess I'm coming back to calm tech now. I didn't think through the AI example, obviously, so I take that back. Maybe I need a better example. Maybe I'll email you or something like that, of what an AI use case might be. Maybe. But even in this example of a railway station, and maybe I'll layer on another example. Honking, incessant honking in India. So this is a big problem in India where they've measured the noise levels in towns and cities and stuff. It's more than 2.5 times the recommended sound in any kind of a city. Like it's something like 110 decibel is the ambient level of noise in any major city, which is like something like 50 decibels is the kind of the recommended noise level. And so when I ask people, why do you honk so much? There's varying answers. There's like, preemptively, we have to honk so that nobody kind of walks in at the last minute on a T junction. I have to preemptively honk so that this person doesn't cut into my lane, and so on. Are there ideas that we could apply in these two situations that could sort of help with, bring it more into alignment with calm tech?
Yes. I mean, that's an assessment of, you figured out why people honk, and that's good. They're signaling a life-threatening situation.
Right.
And so in those situations, they do need to honk because there isn't a better system.
Maybe because I've also driven a lot when I've been in India. And it's a perception thing more than anything else, because I can count on my hand how many times I honk when I drive my car. It's also like maybe a low trust society thing. But in any case, I was thinking you talk about beam forming and stuff like that, where it's more targeted. Are there other ways to kind of solve this problem? We're kind of anxious about what's going to come in front of us and things like that. Like, are there ways we could? Is there a visual way we could indicate, hey, don't come into the lane, or maybe
There's probably lights that can show up that detect an oncoming vehicle, and just put a red light at the beginning of the intersection so people don't know, so people know not to come through. And people can start to rely on that. That will need to be tested, obviously.
yeah,
That doesn't require AI because
right,
you'd need, it's really about what's the lowest tech solution. And Mark Weiser, talks about AI is not necessary, and AR and VR are not necessarily in most situations.
yeah,
I'll tell you where the AI has figured out the preferences, though, because you asked that question.
mhm,
AI has figured out everybody's preferences because it's an algorithm, and that's how we use Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all of those things. And so when you let the AI run loose on your preferences, you end up getting extremely addictive content. You're not getting, hey, when I'm home, I want the light to be like that. That's a profile. When you set a profile on your phone, do not disturb, focus, whatever, again, you design the profile, you set it, the thing needs to be under your control, and you're given that affordance there. But you're the one that should be able to dial that in. And if somebody else walks into the house and it matches that person's profile, then they should be able to load that profile. And if two people are in the house and there's a conflicting profile, well, these are kind of these like jokes around, what should things be at? Um,
mhm,
how do you set the thermostat, for instance? Um, and so it's there's a lot of people who've done like behavioral economics and governance systems based on that sort of thing. But the best thing you can do to keep a human in the loop, to go back to cybernetics, control systems theory, feedback loops, all of that sort of thing, the things that keep airplanes in the air with the airplane wing and all the turbulence, is that I think systems should be more based like that, including companies, where they can withstand some turbulence and some divergence from the norm and still self-right themselves. But they're not doing, like a car is doing a lot for you behind the scenes and you're steering it. And so you should be steering your thermostat, but it shouldn't be steering you. um,
mhm,
but it's just odd because a lot of this is like a mind swap. It's like, here's assumption X, and then asking where you got that question is super, super important, because someone told me like the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions that you ask, for
mhm,
instance. And I think trying to figure out, what's the real thing behind the scenes, what's the real necessity. I've seen some countries just make the surfaces of roads like more narrow or bumpier, and so people have to slow down.
yeah,
And there's a lot of like softening of these edges, so that like things can be slowed down. Literally, calming things that are made with physical objects. They don't have to be more systems. And indication systems can be really good. That can be around for a really long time. Um, and that's traffic traffic people, traffic people, urban planners, um, traffic engineers, civil engineers. All of these people have gone to multi-year programs that have safety and ethics and engineering built in to try to make resilient systems that can withstand a lot of stuff and not kill people. And so in the lack of that, people just become accustomed to honking, which, I'd rather have someone honk at me and it be really noisy and I don't die until the system has something better. But I also don't want the system to require a bunch of rare earth minerals and a bunch of really expensive technology in order to make something work. I think the best system is the original self-driving car, like the train, the subway system, where you make urban planning environments so that it's very dense, but you get connected by these nodes and everybody lives walking distance to the node. And if you don't have that, you can ride a motorcycle. And there's a lot of these narrower streets, and there's a lot of walking streets that don't allow for this except for um, ambulances and things like that. So you're not just having traffic everywhere, but that requires a completely different shape. It's
right.
more about like,
Redesign of the city
yeah,
itself.
you
Yeah,
can't do that. That's so expensive, and you might get it wrong. So it's really about like, how do you work within what already exists and change the behavior slowly so that over time, um, that stops over the course of 10 years, possibly. Because again, it's the real
How
world.
would you propose we slowly change the behavior in this case?
I would talk with people that, since I haven't lived in India and I've only visited like a little bit,
Yeah.
I enjoyed it because
Yeah.
I liked being part of that flow. I also enjoy living in New York. But I would hang out with multi-generational people. I would drive. I would talk with people and try to figure out the right research question for the minimum amount of work and effort and construction to start to reduce that over a 10-year timeline, so that you can see the issues that happen and have test intersections, stuff like that. Again, you're dealing with human life. So how are you going to test it? If it fails, you might have a death on your hands. So it needs to be done very carefully. I don't know if I would be the right person to design that research,
Yeah.
even though it would be
What?
great. But I think it's not a question that's answerable in 3 minutes or even
Sure.
approachable. And that's good. Because if systems were that changeable or questions were that answerable that quickly, that's a serious one that demands respect and time and testing. And that's why it's good not to move too quickly on something like that.
Yeah. Why is your intuition? This is out of curiosity. It makes sense to me, but could you explain why is your intuition that the technology should work with the minimal amount of tech involved? It should work when it fails. That makes sense to me, but it should be the simplest thing possible. Why is that? Why is more complexity, other than the fact that more complexity means more points of failure? Are
Yeah.
there other, is that the main reason, or are there other considerations too? Are there, I don't know, whatever your experience is, I want to hear what your sort of philosophy is in that space.
I think it's just about the more complexity you have in a system and the more points of failure, the longer it takes to train somebody to learn the system, to replace it, and the more the system, when it entropies, distracts you from being a human.
Mm.
And I believe in designing systems that also have maintenance built into them, as in a human maintains them, and a human takes pride in their work maintaining them and knows how to maintain them. And you have a warning before they break, so that it's a soft breakage and not a hard breakage, so that um, don't have a you don't have like a hard thing. Like it is the same with like an indicator of a battery on a laptop. Like laptop will run out of battery and shut off, but you have a warning, so you can determine when you want to charge it. Um, and there's digital twin technologies and things like that that represent the digital version of your system and help you to get products when you might run out. Um, and these are all really important things. But it's more about refocusing, like the cleverness in a design is designing with less. It's also cheaper to manufacture that way, and you might not have to change it for multiple generations if you do it that way. Now, again, if you're a kid, you're going to want the newest, latest, weirdest, complex thing because it's fun.
Right.
But as people get older or busier, doesn't necessarily need to be old. Not everybody wants to configure things a lot and be in the configuration panel of a system. It also doesn't mean that the configuration should be done for them by an AI without their consent. No,
Mm-hmm.
that's a nightmare. That's bad science fiction. Um, it's more that a system should be easy enough to understand. You can still have to be an expert to do it. That it's not so expensive. Like the scale is also about like just looking at the ARM chip manufacturing. They made a chip that was easy to reproduce because it didn't have that many components. That's the cleverness in the design. Now, I think my pair of Bose noise canceling headphones is really complex. And I need that because I'm on a plane a lot. I'm always in like 90 to 92 decibel environments, and I need to protect my ears. It also makes me less tired when I get off an international flight. And I can go to the very loud train stations all over the world, and I can be in an extremely loud car, and but um, it, it's really that a system shouldn't be over designed with a bunch of extra stuff because that slows the system down. It slows the development process down. It slows the user experience process and people getting used to it. And it's almost like a story problem where you have a bunch of extra stuff in the way. And so
Mhm.
every time you use it, you kind of resent it because it feels like, ew. Like, I'm really
Right.
lazy.
I mean, speaking about noise canceling headphones, that's one of the things I've observed. I have different, head canceling. I've got 3 or 4 different brands for different, from past and things like that. And some of them are designed with such complex buttons around it. It's like by the time I get my noise canceling button on, and there's another button to turn ambient noise on, and then there's another button, and then there's all these kind of, if I hit this accidentally, it just goes into this mode, and I have to take it off to look at the button and then press it and hold it. And then there's some headphones that just work with just one button. They just have like one button. You do this, it turns on. Do this, hold your hand around the cup of the thing, and you can listen to the ambient noise and things like that. But anyway, the smartwatches, like from a comm technology perspective, do you think they align or contradict with them? And what's your view on that?
I think it's not necessarily the watch itself, but how you interact with the watch. So if you're using it to not look at your phone and still get your heart rate after you go on a run, it's a very different use case than having everything from your Discord server go to you. But
Mhm.
if you're an EMT and there's an emergency and someone gives you context, then it's really about what you feel. It's like, is this glass calm tech or not? If I put terrible, horrible stuff in this glass, it's terrible. But if I put lots of alcohol in it and I drink, and then is this glass calm tech? Is this glass dangerous? Yeah. It's no, the glass is empty. It's what you put in it. So I can either put
Yeah.
water in it and feel good, or I can put alcohol in it and over a feedback loop amount of time feel terrible and ruin my life.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Amber. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your wisdom and everything. I'll be in touch with you soon.
Great. And
Ha-
you'll edit this down a bit, yeah?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Thanks a lot.
This
Have
was
a good
fun.
evening. It was fun.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.